Subscribe to Soul of Kindness for more heart-touching stories. He gave her a kidney she never asked for. She gave him something back that destroyed him completely. What happened between these two people in that hospital will stay with you forever. Daniel Carter was not the kind of man who talked about his feelings. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with rough hands from years of warehouse work and quiet, eyes that had seen too much disappointment to show surprise anymore. He lived in a small two-bedroom house on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio, with his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. The house was not much. The roof had a leak above the bathroom that he kept patching with whatever he could afford. The kitchen floor creaked in 3 places. The heating system made a rattling sound every winter that he kept meaning to fix. But that house was full of something that money could not buy. Every morning, Daniel woke up at 6, made coffee, and then made Lily's breakfast before she even opened her eyes. Scrambled eggs on Mondays, pancakes on Wednesdays, French toast on Fridays, because Lily once said Friday deserved something special. He packed her lunch himself, always with a small folded note tucked between the sandwich and the apple. Some days the note had a joke. Some days it just said, "I'm proud of you." Some days it said nothing except a small hand-drawn star. Lily saved every single one of those notes in a shoebox under her bed. Daniel did not know that. He never asked. He just kept writing them. His life was small by most people's standards. He worked the early shift, came home tired, helped with homework, cooked dinner, and read bedtime stories in a voice that always got slower and quieter as Lily's eyes got heavier. He had no social life to speak of. A few co-workers he ate lunch with. A neighbor, Mrs. Flores, who was 67 and brought him tamales on Sundays and watched Lily when he had errands. It was a quiet life, a repetitive life, but Daniel had made peace with it, because 4 years ago, his life had been broken in a way that changes a person permanently, and he had spent every day since building something steady from the pieces that remained. Sandra had been his whole world once. They met when Daniel was 26 and she was 24, at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was laughing at something across the room when he first saw her, and he thought then that he had never seen anyone look so alive. She had yellow hair that fell past her, shoulders, and a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. She was warm and restless and bright, the kind of person who made everything feel more interesting just by being present. They were married within 2 years. Lily came 2 years after that. For a while they were happy, the kind of happy that feels permanent when you are inside it. But Sandra was restless in a way that Daniel never fully understood. She loved him, he believed that. But she also felt trapped, not by him specifically, not by Lily, but by the smallness of the life they had built. The same street, the same routine, the same struggles month after month. She wanted more, and she did not know how to want it quietly. The arguments started small, then they grew. Then they became a silence that was worse than any argument. The kind of silence where two people sit in the same room and feel completely alone. On a Tuesday morning in March, while Lily was at school and Daniel was at work, Sandra packed 2 bags, called a cab, and left. She left a note on the kitchen counter, 3 sentences. She said she was sorry. She said she needed to find herself. She said she hoped he would understand someday. He never called her to argue. He never showed up at her door. He just came home that evening, saw the note, read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the kitchen drawer. Then he went and picked up Lily from school. He made her favorite pasta. He helped her with her spelling homework. He gave her a bath and read her 2 chapters of her book and kissed her forehead and turned off the light, and then he sat alone in the kitchen for a very long time. He never once told Lily that her mother had chosen to leave. He just said that sometimes grown-ups needed space to figure things out. He said it in a voice that was calm and steady, and Lily accepted it the way children accept hard things when they trust the person telling them. Daniel never spoke badly about Sandra, not to Lily, not to anyone, not even to himself. The call came on a Thursday evening in November 4 years later. Daniel had just finished washing the dinner dishes. Lily was at the kitchen table finishing a school project, cutting out pictures of animals for a poster about ecosystems. The house smelled like dish soap and the last bit of autumn coming through the slightly open window. His phone buzzed on the counter. Marie's name on the screen. Sandra's younger sister. He almost did not answer. He and Marie had not spoken in nearly 2 years. Their last conversation had been brief and awkward, the way conversations are when two people are connected only by someone who is no longer there. He picked up. Marie's voice was not the voice he remembered. It was tight and thin, like something in her had been wound too hard. She apologized for calling. She said she did not know who else to contact, and then she told him Sandra's kidneys had been failing for over a year, a condition that had started quietly and progressed faster than anyone expected. She had been on dialysis for 6 months. She was on the National Donor Registry, but the wait was impossibly long. The doctors had tested every blood relative. Her parents, her sister, 2 cousins. Nobody was a match. She was running out of time. Marie's voice cracked when she said those last 4 words. She apologized again. She said she was not calling to ask him for anything. She just thought he should know. For Lily's sake. Daniel thanked her. He said he would think about it. He hung up. He stood at the kitchen counter for a moment, his hand still on the phone. Lily looked up from her poster. She asked if everything was okay. He looked at his daughter, her small face, her careful eyes, the scissors in her hand, and the half-finished poster in front of her. He said everything was fine. He asked if she wanted hot chocolate. She said yes. He turned to the stove and stood with his back to her, staring at the pot as the milk began to warm. And in the silence of that kitchen, with his daughter humming softly behind him, Daniel Carter made a decision. He called the hospital the next morning. He did not tell Marie. He did not tell anyone at work. He did not even fully explain to Mrs. Flores why he needed her to watch Lily on certain weekday mornings. He just said he had some appointments to take care of, and Mrs. Flores, who was wise enough to ask no questions, simply nodded and said Lily was always welcome. The testing process took 3 weeks. Blood draws, tissue typing, kidney function evaluations, psychological screenings. The doctors were thorough and careful. They explained at every step that compatibility was rare, that most people who came forward for living donation were simply not a biological match, and that there would be no shame in the process ending there. Daniel listened to all of it. He nodded at the right moments. He signed everything they put in front of him. He was not afraid of the tests. He was afraid of what came after. On a grey Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after his first appointment, his doctor called him into a private office, closed the door, and sat down across from him with an expression that Daniel could not immediately read. The doctor said he had been practicing transplant medicine for 22 years. He said in those 22 years, he had seen near-perfect compatibility between unrelated donors and recipients exactly twice. Daniel was a match, not a close match, not a partial match, a near-perfect biological match for Sandra. The doctor asked him if he needed time to consider. He said a decision like this deserved careful thought. He reminded Daniel of the risks. 1 functioning kidney, a recovery period of 4 to 6 weeks, a small but real surgical risk, the permanent, irreversible nature of the donation. Daniel looked at the doctor for a moment. Then he said, "Schedule it." The night before the surgery, Daniel sat on the edge of Lily's bed after she fell asleep. He watched her breathe for a long time, the slow rise and fall of her small chest, the way her fingers curled slightly near her face, the faint sound of her exhaling, soft and steady and completely at peace. He had written her a letter that evening, just in case. He put it in an envelope and gave it to Mrs. Flores with instructions not to open it unless something went wrong. Mrs. Flores held the envelope with both hands and looked at him for a long moment and then pulled him into a hug, without saying anything at all. He arrived at the hospital at 5 in the morning. The corridors were quiet and blue-white under the fluorescent lights. A nurse walked him through the pre-op process with gentle efficiency, the kind of professional calm that comes from doing something important every single day. Sandra did not know he was the donor. He had specifically asked the medical team not to tell her until the morning of the procedure. He was not sure why he wanted it that way. Maybe because he knew that if she found out earlier, she would refuse. Maybe because he needed to get to the point of no return before she could stop him. When the nurse pulled back the curtain of the pre-op bay and Sandra saw him lying there in his hospital gown, everything in her face changed at once. She said his name, just his name, barely above a whisper. He looked at her, and for the first time in 4 years, they looked at each other without the buffer of distance or silence or a child between them. Just two people in a hospital, 4 years older, 4 years heavier with everything that had passed. She asked him why. Her voice was not angry. It was not relieved. It was something rawer than either of those things. The voice of a person who has just been handed something they know they do not deserve. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked toward the small square window at the end of the room, where the early morning sky was just beginning to lighten. Then he said simply and quietly, "Lily needs her mother." Sandra covered her mouth with her hand. Her shoulders shook. She cried in a way Daniel had never seen her cry in all the years they were together. Not the frustrated tears of their arguments or the quiet crying she did when she thought he was asleep. This was something older and deeper, the kind of crying that comes when a person finally stops running from something and turns around to face it. Daniel closed his eyes. The surgical team came for him a few minutes later. The surgery lasted 6.5 hours. Mrs. Flores brought Lily to the hospital at noon. She had packed a backpack with coloring books, crackers, apple juice, and a small stuffed rabbit named Captain that Lily carried everywhere. Lily sat in the waiting room with her legs swinging off the chair, working quietly through a coloring book while Mrs. Flores sat beside her with her hands folded and her eyes on the door. Lily asked at one point what exactly her daddy had done. Mrs. Flores thought carefully about how to answer. She said that Lily's daddy had given a very important part of himself to help someone who needed it. She said not many people would do something like that. She said it took a very special kind of person. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if that made him a hero. Mrs. Flores looked at the ceiling. She pressed her lips together. She said, "Yes, baby, that's exactly what it makes him." Lily nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Then she went back to her coloring. When the surgeon appeared in the doorway 3 hours later and said both patients were stable and recovering well, Marie dropped into a chair and pressed her face into her hands. Mrs. Flores exhaled so slowly it seemed like she had been holding her breath for hours. Lily looked up from her coloring book. She had been working on one drawing for most of the afternoon. A family, a tall man with brown hair, a little girl with pigtails, and a woman with yellow hair standing between them. She held it up to show Mrs. Flores and said she was going to give it to her daddy when he woke up. Mrs. Flores could not speak for a moment. She just nodded and squeezed Lily's hand. Daniel spent 5 days in the hospital. The pain was significant in the first 2 days, the deep, pulling ache of a body adjusting to sudden absence. He managed it without complaint. He slept a great deal, asked the nurses questions about his recovery timeline, and spent the hours he was awake staring at the ceiling or watching the light change. Through the window, Sandra was recovering in a room at the far end of the same floor. He did not ask about her. The nurses did not volunteer information. There was an unspoken understanding that whatever had happened between them in that pre-op bay was private and fragile, and that the space between their 2 rooms was not his to cross. On the 3rd day, Marie came to visit him. She sat in the chair beside his bed and looked at him for a long time before she said anything. Then she said she did not have the words. She said she had spent 3 days trying to figure out what a person was supposed to say to someone who had done what he had done, and she had come up empty. Daniel told her she did not need to say anything. She stayed for an hour anyway. She talked about small things, her job, her apartment, a trip she was planning in the spring. Normal things, ordinary things, the kind of conversation that people have when they are trying to hold something very large and emotional at arm's length, just long, enough to get through an afternoon. When she left, she stopped at the door. She turned back. She said Sandra had asked about him. Daniel looked at the window. She said Sandra wanted him to know that she was sorry, not just for being sick, for everything. Daniel did not respond for a moment. Then he said, "Tell her to focus on getting better." Marie nodded. She left. Daniel turned back to the window and watched a bird land on the ledge outside, and then fly away again. He was discharged on a Friday morning. Lily came with Mrs. Flores to bring him home. She walked beside him in the corridor with both hands wrapped around his arm, small and serious, matching his slow pace without complaint. She had made him a card, purple marker on yellow paper, with a drawing of the two of them holding hands outside their house. Inside it said, in her careful, uneven handwriting, "You are the best dad in the whole world and I love you all the way to space and back." He folded it and put it in the front pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. They were walking slowly down the long main corridor toward the exit when they passed the hall that led to the long-term recovery wing. The door to room 14 was slightly open, just a few inches, enough to see the edge of a bed, a window with afternoon light coming through. Daniel kept walking, but Lily stopped. She stood in the corridor and looked through the gap in the door, and Sandra, lying in the bed with her eyes half open, turned her head and saw her. Everything went still. Neither of them moved. The woman in the bed with yellow hair, pale and thin but alive. The little girl in the corridor with pigtails and a purple coat, holding a get-well card she had made for her father. Then Lily walked through the door. She climbed carefully up onto the edge of the bed, the way she had climbed into Daniel's bed 1,000 times after a nightmare. She rested her small head against Sandra's arm and was quiet. Sandra closed her eyes. A tear slid down the side of her face and disappeared into the pillow. Daniel stood in the doorway. He did not go in. He did not call Lily back. He just stood there and watched. This man who had given a piece of his body to keep this moment possible, and he let it be what it was. After a few minutes, Lily slid back off the bed. She straightened her coat. She walked back to Daniel and took his hand again. She did not say anything, neither did he. They walked out into the December afternoon together. The weeks between the surgery and Christmas passed quietly. Daniel recovered slowly. He tired easily and moved more carefully than usual, but he did not slow down more than he had to. There were lunches to pack, notes to fold, Friday French toast to make, Lily's winter concert at school, where she played a triangle in the third row and waved at him from the stage with an enormous smile. He clapped louder than anyone in that auditorium. Life returned to its rhythm, small and steady and his. On the evening of Christmas Eve, Lily was in the living room arranging ornaments on the lower branches of the tree, the ones she could reach, humming along to a carol playing softly from Daniel's phone on the counter. The house smelled like pine and the cinnamon candle. Mrs. Flores had brought over that morning. There was a knock at the front door. Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel and went to answer it. Sandra was standing on the porch. She was wearing a dark green coat and a scarf wound twice around her neck. She looked different from the woman in the hospital bed, stronger in her posture but quieter in her eyes. The way people look when something large has shifted inside them and they are still adjusting to the new weight of it. She was holding a small cream-colored envelope. She said she was not there to cause any disruption. She was not there to ask for anything or to make things complicated or to reopen things that were better left closed. She just needed him to read something. That was all. She held out the envelope. He took it. She looked at him for one long moment, a look that carried everything she did not say. Then she stepped back off the porch. She said, "Merry Christmas, Daniel." She walked to her car. The engine started. The headlights came on, and she drove away down the quiet, snow-dusted street. Daniel stood in the open doorway with the cold air coming in around him, the envelope in his hands, and the sound of Lily humming a Christmas carol behind him. He waited until Lily was asleep. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, turned off the lamp and pulled her door halfway closed. Then he went to the kitchen and sat down at the table under the single overhead light, with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, and he opened the envelope. 3 pages, both sides. Sandra's handwriting, small and careful, the way it always was when she was writing something she had thought about for a long time. She wrote about the morning she left. She wrote about standing in the kitchen with her bags by the door, writing that note and knowing, even as she wrote it, that it was the most cowardly thing she had ever done. She wrote about the cab ride away from the house, watching the street disappear behind her, and feeling not liberated, as she had told herself she would, but hollowed out, empty in a way that did not fill up again the way she had expected. She wrote about the years after, the apartment she had moved into, the jobs, the therapy she had eventually started, which had slowly helped her understand that what she had been running from was not Daniel, not Lily, not the house or the routine or the life they had built. She had been running from herself, from the fear that she was not capable of being the person that life required her to be. She wrote about hearing, through Marie, small things about Daniel over the years. The notes he wrote Lily every day, the way he never once poisoned their daughter against her, the way he just kept showing up, quietly and steadily, every single day. She wrote about the moment in the pre-op bay when she saw him lying there and understood what he had done, and what it cost him and what it meant. She wrote, "I have spent 4 years telling myself that leaving was the brave thing, that it was honest, that it was necessary, and then you lay down on a table and gave a piece of your body to save my life. Not because I deserved it, not because I had earned it, but because our daughter needed her mother, and I understood in that moment what real bravery actually looks like. It looks nothing like what I did. It looks exactly like what you did." Daniel's hands were not entirely steady by the time he reached the second page. She wrote about the recovery, the long, quiet days in the hospital room, the afternoon Lily had walked through her door and climbed up onto her bed without a word. She wrote that she had not been able to stop thinking about it since. The absolute unconditional nature of a child's love. The love that she had left behind and that had somehow, impossibly, still been waiting for her. She wrote that she was not asking for forgiveness. She said she had spent enough time in therapy to know that forgiveness was not something you could ask for. It was something the other person arrived at, or did not, on their own terms and in their own time. She had no right to request it. She just wanted him to know that she understood, finally and completely, what she had thrown away. And then, on the last half of the third page, the handwriting changed slightly, became more deliberate, like she had stopped and restarted several times. She wrote that she had made some arrangements, that the week after her surgery, when she was strong enough to make phone calls, she had contacted her attorney. She had updated her legal documents. She had named Daniel as the sole beneficiary of her life insurance policy and her savings. Everything she had, not to him personally, but held in trust for Lily's future, for college, for whatever she needed, for all the years Sandra had not been there to contribute. She wrote that it was not enough. She knew that it would never be enough. But she wanted Lily to have something that came from her mother, something real and lasting and useful, something that said, "Even in absence I was here, and you mattered to me, and I wanted your life to be good." And in the last 4 lines, in handwriting that was slightly uneven in the way that handwriting gets when hands are shaking, she wrote, "You gave Lily her mother back. There is no currency in the world that pays for that. But I want her to know, and I want you to know, that her father was the greatest man I ever had the privilege of knowing. I was too broken and too afraid and too selfish to deserve him. I hope someday he finds someone who is not." Daniel put the letter down on the table. He sat for a long time without moving. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and steady, the way snow falls on nights when the whole world seems to go quiet. The Christmas lights on the house across the street blinked, slowly through the kitchen window, red and gold and white, reflecting off the fresh snow on the ground. Inside, the house was still. The coffee beside him had gone completely cold. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the hall, behind a half-open door, Lily breathed in the slow and peaceful rhythm of a child who has never doubted for a single moment that she is loved. And this man, this quiet and steady and unbreakable man, who had spent 4 years holding everything together with nothing but will and love, and the memory of a note left on a kitchen counter lowered his head slowly into his hands, and he wept. Not from bitterness, not from anger, not even entirely from grief. He wept from the sheer crushing weight of it all, from the years of silence and the love that had never actually left, and the kidney that was now keeping someone alive down the road, and the letter on the table, and the child sleeping down the hall, and the snow falling outside, and the Christmas lights blinking quietly on and on and on. He wept for the life that might have been, and for the life that was, and for the strange, painful, beautiful truth that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also the ones who, in the end, finally see us most clearly. He sat at that kitchen table for a long time. When he finally lifted his head, he folded the letter carefully. He slid it back into the envelope. He stood up, carried his cold cup of coffee to the sink and rinsed it out. Then he walked down the hall, pushed Lily's door open a little wider, and stood there in the soft dark looking at his daughter. She stirred slightly. Without opening her eyes, she said, "Daddy." He said, "I'm here." She made a small sound of satisfaction and went still again. He stood there until her breathing deepened. Then he turned off the hall light and went to bed. Some people will walk out of your life and take pieces of you with them that you will never fully get back. And some of those same people will spend years, quietly and privately, understanding the magnitude of what they lost. The most extraordinary thing about Daniel Carter was not that he donated a kidney. It was that he spent 4 years raising a child who still drew her mother with yellow hair. That kind of love does not ask to be noticed. It does not wait for applause. It just keeps showing up, every morning making breakfast, folding notes and believing, without proof, that doing the right thing matters. If this story moved you, please share it with someone today. And tell us in the comments, what do you think Daniel should do next?